This video is sponsored by Ground News. Cars. Cars are cool and interesting machines. They come in lots of neat forms and shapes, and they are fun to drive. They are a great hobby and a useful tool to get around where there is no good alternative. So cars are great. The problem starts when they get to dominate our lives. When all our public spaces are given over to cars and we focus on very expensive and wasteful car infrastructure at the expense of taxpayers' money and physical space. When cars make other ways of getting around dangerous, like walking or biking for fear of getting run over. When excessive car use causes noise pollution, air pollution, and recently with those xenon headlights, light pollution. People living in car-centric places also gain weight more easily due to lack of movement, and car-centric residential areas are generally less desirable compared to their traditional counterparts. Basically, the car is a great servant but a terrible master. And there is another surprising field where this logic applies. Video games, with Cyberpunk 2077 being an especially egregious example. Why? How? What? Let's take a look.
Wake the fuck up.
Cyberpunk 2077 is a shooter/role-playing game, sort of, set in a corporatist, violent, dystopian, cyberpunk future, get it? Where inequality, poverty and violence are rife, where cities are composed of gaudy corporate skyscrapers and walled-off communities for the wealthy, surrounded by various stages of urban decay, ranging from somewhat okay areas to highly dangerous slums. And all of this is turbocharged via commonly available cybernetic augmentations which can improve human performance in various ways, with the side effect of turning dangerous criminals into biomechanical murder machines. Quite ironically, the development of Cyberpunk 2077 was itself reminiscent of a cyberpunk corporatist future. Developers were overworked, forced to do so-called crunch, which is a games industry euphemism for abusing employees, with up to 65 to 80-hour work weeks without extra compensation. CD Projekt Red, the developer of Cyberpunk 2077, was especially guilty of this during the game's development. Employees were forced to work 6 days a week for more than a year, and I would imagine those weren't 8-hour workdays either. The company later apologized, including for calling the crunch not that bad, and promised that from now on, the crunch will be optional, a more humane approach to crunch, which is like a more humane approach to beating your kids. And anyone who has ever worked in an office environment knows that optional overtime is optional in name only. Sure, you can skip it, but if you do, guess what? From then on, you'll just happen to get all the bad assignments, you'll also miss out on promotions, and whenever there is layoffs, guess whose name is first on the list? And surely enough, a year later it came out that crunching at CD Projekt Red goes on all the same. And for what? Let's talk about that after a word from returning sponsor Ground News. In any cyberpunk dystopia, being well informed is essential. Ground News achieves exactly that by being a news aggregator website that collects articles from around the world and gives you an overview about different sources' takes on a given story, enabling you to easily see a news source's political bias, reliability, ownership, and more. Ground News is a basic necessity even in our world, which is about to become a cyberpunk dystopia itself. Let's take the story about the Air Canada strikes, about employees defying a return-to-work order and continuing to strike due to low wages. Up here we can see the summary of news stories from the left, center and right. Next to them is the bias comparison tab highlighting the focus and emphasis of each side. Essentially your vibe check function, very highly useful in gauging political sides' attitudes to a given topic. Here for example, the left focuses on employees' exploitation while the right takes an anti-employee stance, with the center sticking to passive reporting of events. Ground News tells us that this story was covered by 141 news sources at the time of recording, with a slight overrepresentation of left-leaning sources. Further down, there is a neat visual representation of sources and their leanings, in addition to factuality rates and sources' ownership structure. All the information needed for a balanced media diet. Ground News is a powerful information tool helping you navigate the news information landscape, enabling you to stay on top of the news cycle. Go to ground.news/Adam or scan this QR code to get 40% off the Vantage plan with unlimited access to every feature. Or you can try their Pro plan for just $1 a month. Thank you for checking out Ground News, and thanks to Ground News for sponsoring today's video. Cyberpunk 2077, despite multiple postponements, was a complete mess on release. It was buggy, terribly optimized, prone to crashes, and generally the entire game felt lackluster. A very basic, boring story, a world that felt like an expensive movie set instead of a living place, roleplay elements that didn't let you roleplay, and a very shallow, unintrospective take on the cyberpunk genre as a whole.
Pre-order now.
Blade Runner had you question what it means to be human, whether androids dream of electric sheep, if you will. Ghost in the Shell had you consider a world where the mind can be completely detached from the body, and the question of how would a synthetically born intelligence fit into all that. The Matrix asks, what if your reality was just a simulation? And what if this simulation was still the better option compared to actual reality? Psycho-Pass is set in a universe where a supercomputer scans people's brains and is able to measure potential criminal tendencies. And if it deems you to be too potentially criminal, police will apprehend you in advance. And then we have Cyberpunk 2077 coming in with hot takes such as corporations are bad. Then it goes on to touch on deeper cyberpunk themes but doesn't do much with them, which is pretty audacious if you think about it. The game literally calls itself Cyberpunk. It's like a game called Ultimate Post-Apocalyptic Narrative RPG, and you boot it up and it's Fallout 76. So how come CD Projekt Red's indentured servants couldn't come up with a better story or even a theme to explore? How come Cyberpunk 2077 was so underwhelming compared even to the more sober expectations? How come that despite the insane amount of work going into the game, pushing developers to their absolute limit with multiple long delays even, and the game costing almost $500,000, how come that after all that, the game was still so undercooked and rife with bugs? My hot take? Because of cars. Yep, you heard me right. Let's compare a traditional 19th century residential area to your average 21st century suburb. I'm going somewhere with this, don't worry. The first thing we notice is that the suburb needs far more space to house the same amount of people. Everything is farther away, and having a car is absolutely necessary if you want to get anywhere. In the traditional area, stuff is close by. You can get anywhere on foot or by bike, except in Prague. Also, the buildings around you form an enclosed space. If you've ever looked at photos of narrow medieval streets, that cozy feeling you get is because of that, at least in large part. The buildings forming an organic, protective structure around you. This also puts your brain more at ease, since it only has to process a small segment of area at a time, compared to a large open area with single-family homes with a much wider field of view. And if you want to get to a different area, you usually don't have to walk or drive all the way. You can just get on public transit like a metro and be spat out at your destination. Okay, so how does this compute when it comes to Cyberpunk 2077? Pun very much intended. Consider this. Everything I just told you, the sense of enclosedness, the smaller field of view, things being reachable on foot, areas linked by set lines of public transit, all of these also happen to be major labor-saving methods in video game design. And Cyberpunk 2077 did not utilize any of them. Because of this, Night City is basically a suburb masquerading as an actual city. You need a car to get basically anywhere, unless you want to stare at your character walking for an hour. Now, following the 2.1 update in 2023, a metro system has been added to the game. So now you have 19 locations you can hop in between without having to walk or drive. But this was too little, too late. Designing Cyberpunk 2077 around cars had resulted in a number of problems for game developers. The first and biggest being that they had to build an enormous map. Cars are very mobile, and as long as there are no traffic jams in front of you, you can get to places extremely quickly compared to walking. Traffic in Night City is deliberately set on low to improve game performance and to not have the players stew in traffic jams. But this also means that the city has to be much, much bigger. Otherwise, car rides would take 10 seconds and the city would feel tiny. And since the player is in full control of the car most of the time, you can't even take any design shortcuts, like in racing games, where the environment around the racetrack can be far less detailed because players just zoom past them. It's enough for a town to simply appear like a town from behind the wheel at high speeds obscured by motion blur. In Cyberpunk 2077, however, you must count with players randomly getting out of their car and walking around an area. Therefore, every single street must always be maximally detailed down to the net's ass. Even if 99.999% of players will just zoom past an area, never bothering to look at it, that 0.001% might just decide to and then make fun of you for low detail assets. This alone puts a colossal workload on your developers, which led to the aforementioned massive crunches at CD Projekt Red, which then took away precious development time from things that actually matter, like a good story, actual RPG features, performance optimization, fixing the bugs, and so on. Reliance on cars had forced Cyberpunk developers to build out a 200 square kilometer map, much of it being a very highly detailed urban area. Something that jumps out at you immediately is just how bad the car controls are. Like, it's just WASD, then there's the handbrake, but there's no option like, double tap W to really step on the gas. So I guess my biggest gripe with Cyberpunk 2077 is that, there's so much in here, there's so much content in this game, and pretty much all of it is mediocre. Pretty much every single aspect of this game feels just undercooked and underdeveloped in various ways. The shooting is mediocre, the vehicle controls range from okay to terrible depending on the person, the role-playing is shit. And then there are the technical details where like stuff really falls apart, like the optimization is still terrible, bugs everywhere, the AI and the real-time events are absolute shit. Like here, like what's going on here? Like there's some kind of random shootout 200 meters away from a police checkpoint, and then like nothing's happening. The first car just like stops and blocks the way as all the others are trying to like ram their way out. Like this does not look like a $500 million game. Yeah, and then I accidentally bump into the police checkpoint and they all open fire at me. Nice. And it's shit like this that you keep encountering over and over and over again in this game. And by the way, I'm playing on patch 2.3, so we're like half a decade of post-release development in, and the game is still in such a state. And the further problem is that now you have to account for the player having a 2-ton high-velocity metal tub that they can bring to most places. So you either need to set car drop-off points to prevent the player from parking in scripted locations, or design quest locations in a way that they are separate and cannot be entered by car. So now your game developers have to spend their time and energy on developing parking policy and implementing transit modal filters instead of focusing on the actual game. The car-centric game world also causes a metric ton of additional work with developing traffic simulations, NPC car on player car interactions, pedestrian NPC on player car interactions, NPC car on pedestrian player interactions, subsequent crowd mechanics, and so on. These problems are individually solvable for big developer teams, but if you take them together, plus the need to design a massive, ultra-detailed city, the end result is overwork, constant delays, and the game being stuck in development hell. Then, on release day, players are treated to a buggy, undercooked, unfinished mess that will need constant post-release patching. All at a nearly $500 million price tag, which has only been increasing ever since. Is it a bad game? No, but it's just mediocre. Like the game doesn't have a highlight. It's like, oh, I play Disco Elysium because of the incredible prose, or I play Elden Ring because of the beautiful world and the difficult but very fun, combat mechanics. Or I don't know, I play Death Stranding because of the bonkers themes it explores. And in Cyberpunk 2077, there's just nothing like that. Like the game tries to mash so much shit together that like it can't really focus on any of them properly, at least, and it just all falls apart. To give you an idea of how massive this budget is, Deus Ex: Mankind Divided, a game very similar in genre and theme, cost $50 million, about 1/10 of the money Cyberpunk must have burned through by now. In large part because the game is not car-centric, which is wild as the game is set in Prague. And this enabled developers to focus their efforts on smaller areas instead of one enormous city, cutting down the amount of work by orders of magnitude. With that, let's see if we can fix Cyberpunk 2077 by fixing Night City itself, all the while abiding by the Cyberpunk theme. We start by taking the metro system as a basis. It's 19 stops serving as the fast travel points between game locations. If we need more, we just add more stops. The areas the trains are going through do not need to be fully designed. It's enough to just put up a skybox around the train to make it seem like you're going through the city. The playable area is always separated from procedurally generated car traffic by way of the former being under massive, elevated highways. This plays in nicely with the Cyberpunk theme. In particular, this design is a staple of the 1995 Ghost in the Shell movie, where most of the action takes place in the narrow, dark, moody understreets of Tokyo, with traffic rumbling far above on massive elevated highways. And this design immediately eliminates one of the major development time sinks. You no longer have to bother programming traffic mechanics and vehicle behavior, at least not that much and not that complex, since the player is not directly interacting with them while on foot, except in specific scripted instances. Of course, the player could drive a car later on the highways above, and since those highways are elevated and separated from everything else, the developers only need to construct the building's facades around them. They wouldn't actually need to build out every single street completely detailed. It's enough to make the surroundings of the highways look like a city at a glance, since the player will not be interacting with them up close. And this would achieve two more important things. Number one, the player will actually really look forward to owning and driving a car, since yours was, let's say, taken away and now you're blacklisted from driving or something. And the biometric cameras placed around the city would immediately catch you while driving and police would lock you up. until someone hacks into the police databases or something and removes you from the blacklist as a reward for a quest or something. And this unlocks a bunch of side quests and minigames like illegal highway races, high-speed deliveries on a timer, and so on. And this would actually be a really fun bit of world building. You know, large swaths of the city are essentially left behind by city leadership, there is lawlessness and chaos, except on the highways, which is weirdly ordered and regulated compared to the rest of the city. All this would match the cyberpunk theme beautifully. Cyberpunk worlds are usually very right-wing. Rampant corporatism, societies segregated along levels of wealth, mass poverty, comedic levels of wealth inequality, everything is privatized, and so on. But conservative societies also have a thing for cars. In those societies, public transit is viewed as some sort of low-quality, filthy, dirty, last resort option for the poor and minorities, for those who cannot even afford a car. On the other hand, cars are viewed as the default method for transportation, and being able to afford one is your ticket to civilized society. And the bigger your car is, the shinier and more expensive it is, the more worth you are perceived to have as a human being. So it would actually make a lot of narrative sense for your character to desire a car, to be up there, high above the filth of the lower city, zooming past the ghettos and slums in your shiny automobile, on the brightly lit, smooth, squeaky clean highway compared to the dark, filthy lower streets. I think this would have been much better than just giving you a car by default, and then having you slowly traverse these narrow streets with a few cars on them at a time. But basing the game's map design on a metro system also enables something extremely important: the shrinking of the world map without it feeling any smaller to the player. With appropriate game design, even the smallest maps will feel enormous. For example, Resident Evil 2's playable map is comparatively tiny, yet it feels absolutely enormous due to a clever use of space and the work you have to put in to actually get to the end of it. So in Cyberpunk 2077, by having the player traverse the map on foot, we could get away with much smaller maps, while potentially making the game world feel even larger to the player. Developers now only need to fully build out a few streets next to stations, which would be an enormous reduction of their workload. They could even layer the maps for more complexity. Most locations could have extensive underground parts, for example in the sewers, which is once again very fitting of the cyberpunk theme, and are also way faster to design and build. And it also goes way easier on your GPU. I guess a lot of people would not be okay with shrinking Night City, because it's less cyberpunk, we have less cyberpunk now. But that's like, imagine that we both like hamburgers, right? And we can either go to this regular restaurant where for like $10 you get a burger, fries and a drink, or we can go to this other restaurant where for $10 they take 6 Big Macs, they put them in a big bowl and they blend them down for you into a paste and then they spoon feed it to you. And it's like in the second case you get technically more of the thing that you like, but is that really a positive in this case? So I believe that basing Cyberpunk 2077 on walking in transit would have resulted in a much better game, where developers would have had the time to implement actual role-playing elements and a great memorable story instead of having you play the exact same character except with a different backstory that barely influences anything. They could have made the tutorial sequence an organic part of the game, instead of a random simulation that interrupts your first mission before it even starts. Or somehow account for the fact that your character, if choosing the corpo background, will have personally witnessed an assassination of public officials shown to you live in your boss's office, who clearly and openly admits that it was done by your corporation.
You know what to do. Start now. Director Abernathy.
I watched the vote. What the hell was that?
A deep clean after the shit Frankfurt dumped on us. As we agreed, I got rid of the problem.
I told you to resolve the problem, not massacre the European Space Council. Do you understand what the cover-up will cost?
Your boss seems to be fully comfortable with this, despite the cutthroat nature of the corporate world and the ubiquitous presence of recording devices, including ones that might be installed in your cybernetic augmentations. But it doesn't matter, since all of this has absolutely no impact on the rest of the game. The next scene is you drinking champagne in your boss's personal AV, flying car, that he gave you to use, only to have corporate goons show up 5 minutes later and strip you of your job position, money, and even cybernetics.
TT policy's gone, Jack. So are my biochem controllers, company pad. I mean, they have seized. My bank account not frozen, seized. That'd be that, Jack. Just lost control of my life. Completely.
which is quite jarring to say the least. Like, Jesus Christ, dude. Look, I know what they were going for here. They wanted to showcase the cruel, cutthroat nature of the corporate world, but this is just so ham-fisted. It's like you being friends with the US Vice President, and you yourself are a high-ranking White House official, and then one day the VP is like, hey man, hey, check out this recording of us assassinating fucking Ursula von der Leyen. Yes, it was us. This was done by us. We were the ones responsible for this deed. Oh, by the way, here are the keys to the presidential limo. Go take it for a spin. And then 5 minutes later, like 2 FBI dudes show up and it's like, oh, actually, you're homeless now. What? This is how politics works. Like, come on, man. But story aside, game mechanic oversights are often flat out embarrassing. Like, nobody thought about what happens if the player just climbs on top of an NPC's car when it stops at a red light. The game clearly has no idea how to handle this, and other cars around you start bugging out with random NPCs screaming and so on. Many of Cyberpunk 2077's failings are due to an unfocused, megalomaniac yet shallow vision of what the game should be, bloated beyond all proportions, inflated by an incompetent leadership, who refused to accept that the project needed some serious strategic downscaling and instead proceeded to crack the whip and forced their employees to crunch for more than a year. In some bizarre sense, CD Projekt Red ended up becoming something of a cyberpunk corporation itself, where employees are just cogs in a machine built to generate money from their blood, sweat and tears. I guess it just really annoys me how people have a really low standard for the media they consume. And this especially applies with video games, I feel like. And the video game industry is especially guilty of like being able to get away with releasing unfinished shit and people thinking that it's okay. Like, imagine if Netflix came out with a series and it's like, oh, you know, it's full of actor gaffes, outtakes, sound issues, missing special effects, but that's okay, we're gonna release a new version in a year and then it should be mostly done. Like, I'm sorry, what? And it's like, wow, what a hot take. When you release something, it should be done. And Cyberpunk, after half a decade of continuous patching post-release, still feels like it's in late beta. Like the game is not done. Cyberpunk 2077 is the prime example of less is more, and it could have been achieved if the game was based on transit and walking instead of cars. Or at the very least, it could have gone a long way in making it a much better game than what it currently is.